is good so that we can accommodate some other schedules. So with that, I'm sorry you have not been able to get on the Zoom, Jacob. I'll just, oh, it looks like maybe you're on now. Okay, I'll go ahead and just introduce ourselves. As Jacob Westfall is the chair of the CAP subcommittee, and he's having some Zoom issues, although he is on the phone, I believe.
Yes.
Right now.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, hey, Jacob, if you want to take it away, Dan, with introductions, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Yes, I'm having a little trouble with Zoom. Sorry, everyone. So we'll have to do sort of the roll call individually. I won't be able to read your names off from the attendance list that I would normally see in Zoom. But yes, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second subject matter experts meeting on the CAP. Well, the event terms for CAP is how we ended up settling on the titling for this particular document. We're looking forward to getting your input in terms of how the document has progressed, in terms of us developing the committee note and the list that goes with it. Certainly looking for your feedback and insights in terms of how we can improve the document, and then, of course, manage it going forward with, submitting terms and events and other things that we obviously want to make sure that this document retains some measure of usefulness and is able to be be updated and improved going forward into the future. So to start with, I'm going to do the roll call. My name is Jacob Westfall. I'm the chair of the subcommittee for the Common Learning Protocol, and I'm located in Canada. My background is in emergency alerting and public notification, and I'd like to welcome everyone today. Next up, maybe we'll start with the group members for the attendance, and maybe if I could just ask those members who are already on the subcommittee to just sort of announce yourselves, where you're from, and then we'll get to those guests and subject matter experts who are joining us today. So up next, maybe Elisa, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Lisa Jones, most of you know me. I'm the chair of the Emergency Management Technical Committee, of which the CAP subcommittee is one of our subcommittees, most active, of course, and our standard that's been used for so long. I'm very glad to be chair of this technical committee since 2004. I don't know where the years go, but here we are. I'm located in Alabama, and I've been in alert and warning for many years and support emergency communications around the world in different companies, organizations, and countries. So I do see the list here, so I'll go down the list and request each. So Norm, if you would introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Norm Paulson. I'm also in Canada. I've been a meteorologist for Environment Canada since 1989. I've been a member of OASIS and the CAP subcommittee since around 2005. And my career is all about warnings and alerts and CAP and all those things. So yeah, it's just another good activity in an ongoing list of activities that has kept me busy and entertained for the last 30 years.
Thanks, Norm, and he'll be telling us a lot about the list. He's had quite an input in the list, so thank you for that. Frank Bell, and Frank is not on the subcommittee, but I'm just going down the list. Please introduce yourself, Frank.
Yes, Frank Bell, been taking an interest in this for a long time, since 2004 when I was working in broadcasting and there was this tsunami in Asia, and I thought, we ought to make something better than how that is right now.
And Frank, can you tell us where you are and what you contributed to the list, perhaps, as a motion, as a note?
Yes, I'm in Clifton, New Jersey, originally from New Zealand, and I'm revising the work that I've been doing to incorporate it on the basis of urgency, severity, and certainty.
All right, thank you for that. Andreas, please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Andreas Schaffhauser. I'm a meteorologist working at ZMG. That's the Austrian National Met Service. So I'm sitting here in Innsbruck in Austria in the midst of the Alps. And I'm representing EUMETNet, the organization of the European Meteorological and Hydrometeorological Services. And I'm the program manager of EUMETNet METEOLAM project. So we aggregate European weather warnings and distribute them over the whole globe, and we're using CAP as the standard format for the weather warnings. And, we provided our hazard types for the collection of the event type lists.
Great, thank you for that, Andrea. Gary Ham.
Yes, I'm Gary Ham. I work for the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System here in the United States. Been working for them since 2006. I'm actually a plank holder in the OASIS Emergency Management Technical Committee. I was there when it was formed. I was working out of Virginia most of the time. I now work from wherever I happen to be located, as I tend to be more itinerant. I'm currently in South Carolina.
Thank you, Gary. Mike Gerber, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. My name is Mike Gerber. I've been in NOAA's National Weather Service here in the United States for going on 28 years or so now. My background is in actually fire weather, that is forecasting weather for wildfires, and of course public alerting. I've been in public alerting for probably the last 10 or probably close to 15 years now. Dissemination, actually. Heavily involved in the National Weather Service's contributions to the wireless emergency alerts, which hit cell phones, send alerts to cell phones. I've also been involved, heavily involved in common alerting protocol and running that program pretty much for the last probably 10 years, 15 years, and been in OASIS for almost that long as well. We have a pretty big footprint here in the United States when it comes to public alerting. So certainly things like the event terms list are something that very much are something that we're that hit home for us.
All right, thank you, Mike. And last but certainly not least, Scott Robertson.
Hello, I'm Scott Robertson. I'm with Kaiser Permanente in California, which is why you don't see my video. My background is actually in pharmacy and medicine, but I got involved with CAP for some translation work on the HAV protocol. And in this project, I've been sort of managing the review of the terms list. Obviously, I didn't just come up with the list myself, but manage the input so we could come up with one list as a starting point for everything else. So it will be a living document.
Yep, and thank you for our editors, Norm and Scott have been our editors. Scott has been great working with the spreadsheet, and he actually is a PhD from Kaiser Kaiser Permanente, and
well, I'm not a PhD. I'm a PharmD. I have a doctor of pharmacy.
A pharmacy doctor, yes, and he knows all about terms. So he's been a big help in putting this together. I don't see that Rex Brooks is on yet. He's also an editor of the document, but I do have a phone number with an area code 519. Is that you, Jacob, or is that someone else?
That's me calling in, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's our group today. Thank you all for joining. So hopefully you've all seen the event terms list, committee note. I just want to make a couple of statements about what is a committee note. Within OASIS, we have two tracks for product work. One is the standards track, which goes through a very particular development process and approval process, and that's well spelled out on the OASIS site. Several years ago, the committee note process was added, which allows you to develop documents that are not standards as such, but supporting documents for the standards. So that's the route we chose for this effort. So it is in a managed form, but it does not require the same rigor, I guess I would say, for review. However, this is an important document for all of our CAP users, so we did put it out as a committee note for a 30-day review. We may extend that review, but we look forward to getting comments back because this is really a document for the implementers. We want to make sure that it serves the purpose and the need of your organizations. So we had a good call last week where we had a number of, I guess we had 15 people or so on the call and did get some good comments in. The other thing I would say, and actually most of you are OASIS members, so for those that are not, I would just mention that this is an open meeting, but we do have within our technical committee the IPR policy, which is chosen to be RF on RAND. You can look that up on the site, but what that means basically is that we ask you not to contribute anything to the list or to the discussion that might otherwise be proprietary for your company, for which you may choose to invoke royalties down the road. We did that when we stood the technical committee and its subcommittees up in the beginning, making sure that all of our work is free and open. But we do invite comments, and those comments can come in through the comment list. And that way, when you fill out the comment form, you actually, for that comment, say that you agree to that IPR. So we do take comments in that way. You can also send comments directly to Jacob, who was on the invitation that you got. As the chair, we are tracking all of the comments that come in our Wikipedia, not Wikipedia, our Wiki, JIRA tracking device. We have a JIRA tracking system within our organization. So we're tracking comments there, and as our procedure requires, we'll dutifully go through those before we finalize the document. And we have found, of course, there are several little things that need to be changed, and we'll get this out for final, hopefully, maybe within the next 30 days, given the comments we've received. Okay, Jacob, what else was I supposed to talk about that I forgot about? Is that it?
It was, the IPR policy and the difference between the committee note and the standard, and submitting comments. That's excellent. Thank you, Elisa. All right, up next on our agenda today is Norm is going to sort of walk us through the general aspects of the list and its development. And so I'll turn things over to Norm, if you're ready.
All right. Thank you, Jacob. So let's just do this. All right, so I'm putting onto the screen a bit of a capture of a few slides with regards to the committee note. And I'll be talking to these for the next few minutes. And if you can't see it, sorry, apologize in advance, but these are the slides I'll be talking to, and hopefully they're a part of the recording. So let's get started. So here is the, sorry?
Norm?
Yep.
You're not sharing the slides yet.
I am. I got everything says that it's being shared.
Okay.
How about anybody else? Can you see
it?
it?
See my side.
I'm not able to see it either. I'm just seeing videos.
Sorry, the videos.
Now it's starting to come
through.
There it is. There we go. That's
all right.
Thank you, Norm.
All right. Just short one step. All right. All right. So you can still see it? Good. All right. So this is just the front page of the committee note, just showing you what it's being called. There should be a subtitle in there about for use with CAP, but that's why we're going through this exercise to help us comments, feedback, and hopefully tighten up the material a little bit for the next round, the final presentation. Anyways, standard opening page for most things from OASIS. And so let's get started. So the committee note is broken down into 5 sections. It starts with an introduction. We get into some background material. We get into something called event term spectrums. And then we get into more background about spectrum concepts. And then we get into the event terms list itself and a few appendices that go with the committee note. Appendix B is the one that Scott will be talking about later, with the actual list and what makes up the list and exampling a few terms on the list. So let's get started. One of the things that we did when we created the note was we created a background section, and there's the 10 subsections that go with the note. We discuss what is an event, we discuss interoperability, what is a type, what is an event type, what is an alert, and so on. These items are just to set the stage for later discussion, because a lot of these items will be used in the later discussion, and so we wanted to set the foundation for what those terms or these items mean with regards to the larger discussion. So what I want to do is just take a few select items out of section 2 of the document and just show you, give you some examples of what we talk about. So quickly, well, before I get into the example, I'm just going to make a quick reference to the CAP standard itself. So the item that we are referring to in the CAP standard is on the bottom left there. That is the item highlighted in blue called the event element. The event element is the text denoting the type of the subject event of the alert message, not the event itself, but the type of the event. And that's critical to a lot of the conversation going forward, because, for example, Hurricane Katrina is an event, and the type that would be associated to Hurricane Katrina would be simply hurricane. And that's a subtle distinction, but we'll be bringing that back in conversation later on. One of the other things that I want to show on this slide quickly is on the right, the event code element. And I'm just set up one other thing that the CAP standard talks about is how the event code element says multiple instances may occur within an info block. So the event code element can be there several times over, with several different event codes being reported in the CAP message from several different code or list sources. And with the OASIS event terms list being one of those source lists, we do have codes for our list of terms, and we're not asking people to put just our event code into their CAP message. We're asking people to add in our event code in as an extra instance of the event code element in their CAP to help us do some of this work. You can't do that with the event element over on the left-hand side because it's a single-use element in CAP, and that's part of the problem that we're dealing with going forward. So I just needed to establish that issue because it's relevant to the conversation. So anyways, what I'd like to start off is just exempling what is a type in the just a general definition of the term type. To type something is to declare something as sharing similar characteristics to things that went before it. So basically, you're using predefined classification of things to type something. We are coming up with a type based on previous observations of earlier instances of the same thing, and therefore we can associate a new event to a type of an event that's gone on before. Hurricane Katrina, for example, is an event of type hurricane because we knew what hurricane was well before Hurricane Katrina hit, and we can use the type of event as part of our communications with our intended audience, that being the general public in this case, warning them about a hurricane that's coming along, and people can then associate the impacts of that event coming along to something they're familiar with that has been typed a hurricane previously. So in the committee note, we have a section here that basically describes what a type is. And then moving on, what is an event? And because that is the crux of the problem that we're trying to address with the event terms list, an event is something that happens in a given place during an interval of time. It is the recognition of some activity that is a deviation from the normal state of things. An event only becomes significant when affected parties observe or are anticipated to observe some known measure of impact. So in this case, we're now defining event. So the document goes into that. I'm not going to get into the excruciating details of it, but you can read the document, and we talk about the type and then the event. What is an alert? An alert is a transmitted signal to heighten attention and or initiate preparation for action. So basically, an alert is more than an event. An alert is built to to heighten attention to a subject event or an event that's going to happen or is happening. And so these are subtle distinctions discussed in the opening section 2 of this document. And you can read it here. It's a little early in the morning, probably not as early as Scott, but still early in the morning, so I'm not as practiced. But anyways, let's carry on. So back on what is an event. In the case of public alerting, alerting authorities determine whether the impacts of an event of interest is concerning enough to issue a formal alert. So if I have a light wind event, I'm not going to issue a formal alert because there's really no need to warn the public about light winds. So even though I have a light wind event, I do not have a formal public alert for that event, simply because that's not part of what we think is different from the normal state of things. A light breeze is pretty common out there. People are experiencing it almost all the time. And so there's no reason to formally public alert them on that event. But a light wind or a breeze is an event that we could define. So an event does not have to have an alert associated to it. But an alert does need to have an event to discuss. And in CAP, the subject event of the CAP message is critical to a CAP message. So more on that. So going through the document, you can read up on that. All right. Then we get into event term spectrums. Terms can be very specific or very general, depending on the information that needs to be conveyed to the audience. This is especially true for public alerting. And in the example that you see down below, we have a spectrum of terms across the wind/meteorological category or spectrum. And as you can see here, you could have a very broad term to warn people with and say we have a weather warning out for wind, or we could have a slightly more narrower term for that, a storm warning out for wind, or we could have a wind warning out for wind, or we could get really narrow and say that we have a small craft wind warning out for small craft sailing their boats on the water. So there is a broad to narrow spectrum of terms that can be used for a wind event. What each public alerting authority has chosen to use is upon their own, it's part of their own business to decide what terms they're going to use. But we recognize that there's a very broad spectrum of terms used for a wind event. The reason why we call it a spectrum too is that there is no specific level marker for what you want to define as a storm, or what you want to define as wind, or what you want to define as weather. And therefore, the boundaries of those terms are very nebulous. Therefore, instead of it being a scale or a range, it's more appropriately referred to as a spectrum, because it's just a general transition of a broader term weather into more narrow terms like small craft wind. And across that spectrum, there's a number of terms. And my list of terms in that spectrum can be different from your list of terms in that spectrum. We can insert a fifth term in this spectrum here on the screen easily enough, and people are over time are going to be constantly suggesting and requesting new terms be added. So what we are simply defining here is that terms fall into a spectrum, and just know that we're defining the spectrum as a broad to narrow spectrum in order to help us associate one term to another. I'll discuss that a little bit later when we get into related terms, but just for now, I'm introducing the concept of spectrum. Okay, spectrum concepts. A related term. Well, I guess we're right there right now. For every event term, there are other related event terms that others may feel are better terms to use. If a reference term falls into, it should be into, not onto, into one or more broad to narrow spectrums, all terms on those spectra of terms are considered related terms. So to help us begin the conversation with people who want to submit new terms, if we know what spectrum that term falls into, it immediately starts to associate a number of other terms to the term that's being submitted. So one of the things that we would like to do with people who submit terms is find out what spectrum it's in. And so as a request for submitters, we say, well, what is your term? And what is the broad term that this falls into? And that immediately can help us just place the term into a spectrum to begin the discussion of what other terms are related to that term that's being submitted. We'll get to the term itself a little bit later, but basically the spectrum process allows us to allows us to begin the discussion pretty simply without having to fumble a lot of time into trying to figure out what is the category that this new term would fall into. So I'm just going to back up a sec and go back here. What I didn't mention earlier on was that the broad to narrow spectrum that I've been discussing is not the only spectrum type that's out there. There's also urgency spectrums, where you might have an event that's just a mild concern versus another event which may be an emergency level event. We also have spectrums that cross over time, such as an event that's occurred in the past versus an event that's occurred in the future. So you can have an incident that occurred in the past, or you can have a threat, which is an anticipated event that could happen in the future. So the broad to narrow spectrum that I've been discussing is the introduction to spectrums, but be it known that there are other spectrum types out there. Other spectrums that aren't on the list are severity spectrums, but that is already covered by CAP, so we don't need to discuss that spectrum on its own. But if we have a need to, we can have that discussion a little bit later. Anyways, let's go back to the spectrum concept. Within a spectrum, we immediately can associate a term to all the other terms in the spectrum, and now we have a list of related terms that go with the term. If we were to find a thesaurus approach to posting a term and ask that all related terms be shown for that? Well, we simply would be showing all the other terms within the spectrum. It's also possible that a term can cross over more than one broad to narrow spectrum, but we'll get to that. Actually, I'll get to it right now. So for example, back here on the, let's say we have the term storm. It's on the wind spectrum here, but storm could also be on the precipitation spectrum. So a term like storm can cross over multiple spectrums. The narrower you get, the fewer spectrums that the term actually falls into. So that's another consideration. So if someone asks us to put in another term, very broad term like weather, well, it's going to be associated to a lot of other related terms because weather is actually part of several broad to narrow spectrum terms. So moving back down, okay, narrow terms. One of the things that we aren't doing in the OASIS event terms list is we're not getting too narrow. And to use as an example, we could have an event defined as an EF0 tornado or EF1 tornado or EF2 all the way up to an EF5 tornado. Someone could say, well, can I have all six of those terms in the list? EF1 tornado, EF2 tornado, etc. Well, that's a very narrow term, and we're not going to get into in OASIS managing all those very narrow terms. We're simply going to stop at tornado and let anybody else who wants to get a much narrower set of terms based on a scale like EF0 to EF5, or let's say a marine scale such as small craft, gale, storms, hurricane force winds, that type of scale. We're not going to get into those scales. We'll let those communities that want to manage those scales come up with their own event terms list, their own event codes if they like, and they can manage those within their sub-community. In the OASIS case, we'll just stay with the terms down to about the level of wind. For the purposes of interoperability, that's essentially enough for people to associate the subject event of a CAP message from one place to other CAP messages for another place. And the specifics of the narrow scale can be dealt with by the sub-communities that want to get into that level of detail. Moving on, you can read about all that in the committee note. So one of the things that the last section of the document talks about the event terms list itself. We've broken it up into submitted event terms, what event terms OASIS will accept, and what event terms OASIS will not accept. So really quickly, we will accept things that convey a sense of time and place. So for example, if you have a hurricane, that gives you the sense of a time and place for hurricane. However, UV index is not a term on the list because it doesn't give you a sense of time and space. It just gives you an idea that there's some sort of index out there. That's not an event. So if someone asked us to include UV index into the list of event terms, it wouldn't get included because simply it's not an event type, it's a scale. So the document goes through a number of things like that. We do want to talk about terms that fall within the broad to narrow spectrum of terms, different language terms. We have regional terms like monsoon versus typhoon versus hurricane. We have proxy terms like Amber Alert. We have multi-word terms like falling rock, because each of the two words separately do not mean anything on their own, but combined, the multi-word term now means something. We have general terms that are subsume a number of smaller events, such as tropical storm, which may subsume things like wind, rain, high seas, and flood, all as sub-events within the larger collective event. And then we have secondary event terms like boil water advisory. And so the event that's the concern, it might be the contaminated water, but the alert is actually asking people to deal with a secondary event, which is a consequence of the first event, which would be we're asking you to boil water before consuming that water. So we're issuing a boil water advisory, which means the alert is focusing on the secondary event and not really discussing so much the trigger event that started the alert in the first place. And, you know, if people have new mappings, new spectrums for terms to go into for some of our existing terms, we'll look at that as well. So the terms list is a evergreen list that will be growing over time. It will be versioned, and so next thing to do is deal with things like versioning of that list. We'll talk about that in a moment. So now we're looking at Appendix B. Here's the introductory material prior to the event terms list. It gets into some of the details about CAP. This is for the CAP person who's dealing with generating CAP within an organization. Discusses a little bit about how to form some of the elements. And then below that is the event terms list itself. Scott will provide a little bit more on that, but simply put, this event terms list has a event code in the left-hand column, the term in the second column. There's a grouping term, which Scott will get into, and then there is the CAP category that the term can fall into. And since CAP category is a multi-instance element in CAP, it's possible to have more than one value in the CAP category cell here in this table. So that's it for the PowerPoint, but let me just get to the Word document itself. So up on the screen, you can still see my. All right, so sorry, just scrolling to one section. This will be of interest to Andreas. Here is the section where we simply example how the event terms event code value would appear in a CAP message. So simply put, here's one instance of the event code element. It could be one of several instances in any CAP message. And we would have the OASIS event terms list referenced in the value name and its version. And then the coded value that we're using, simply put, recipients of a CAP message with this event code element in it can use the event code to now map to any other local list that you may have. If you've got a mapping of that local list to the the event terms list from OASIS, then you have that. The OASIS event terms list will continue to evolve with new versions, but at this point, we don't believe that you need to reference the latest version. You can reference any existing version that's gone on before. So there's no need to move your originating system up to the latest version the moment OASIS publishes an updated version. This is simply referencing the version that you want to reference, and recipients, as long as they have the same version from us, can cross-reference it. If we ever were to do a retirement of a version, that would be the major version where we'd go up to a version 2. But generally speaking, as new terms come along and get added over time, the The minor version here after the period would be incremented by 1. So there'd be a version 1.1, a version 1.2, and a version 1.3. So just to quickly allay any fears about versions 1.2, 1.3, we don't plan on retiring these event term codes. We'll just be adding new ones. We may tweak the term as we improve the term, but the event term code will remain with that term, and any new terms that come along will be assigned a new coded value. So it won't change the order. It just happens to be that this is alphabetical right now and a numerical sequential value right now. But if there was a new alphabetical term that was to be inserted in between a couple of these terms, it would receive a number like OASIS event term 237. So once 1.0 moves on, this list, numerical list here, will simply no longer be sequential if we are publishing a list with alphabetical terms. So that means that aircraft incident 008 will also be there in 1.1, it'll be there in 1.2, and it'll be there in 1.3, and that won't change. The only time a term might be retired is if we move to a version 2 and then we put out a 1 or 2 year horizon or sunset period of saying that we're retiring the earlier versions and we're resetting with a new version 2.0, but there would be a long time given before that switchover date and the old version is officially retired. We don't know if we'll ever get to a 2.0. That's not the point to get to a 2.0. It's just in case we need to get to a 2.0 based on how things evolve. So quite likely this will be a 1.x for a long time. That's generally what I want to talk about. The rest is to get feedback and comments. A user's guide to using this material is not part of this committee note. This is just the subject matter. So a user's guide is in discussion for later material to go with this. But right now, this is the foundation for all this material, and we'd like to get this settled, solidify it to some degree, get comments and feedbacks before we get into nailing down a user's guide. So that's it for my part of the presentation, and I'll hand it back to Jacob, or if anybody has any questions.
Well, thank you, Norm. Yes, the next step was to actually see if there were any questions from the attendees, just in terms of the general structure of the committee note and how it was developed, and any of the material that Norm has covered so far. So the floor is open if there's any questions.
So just to ask Andreas, does this seem to meet the needs that that you've been looking for?
Okay, for me it's fine. We also discussed the note within Meter Lab, and we like the approach. And also we are just working on a revision of the meter of the CAP profile in Meter Alarm, and we are discussing a way how we can also implement the event codes in the scheme that we use in Meter Alarm.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for that feedback. Any other questions or comments?
It's Norm here. One thing that I forgot to mention was there's nothing wrong with using your own event terms in the event element in CAP, but if you want to use the event terms found in our table, you're welcome to use those terms as well. The terms, we're not claiming to own any jurisdiction over those terms and how they get used in a local use of CAP in any country or any system. But you're welcome to use them if you like. But all we're asking is that whatever terms you do use, if you can in the event code element, map it back to these terms so that we can show for others how to take a CAP from a system and map the event to other events in other systems, including other systems that are using a different language, because the event term code will be language independent. And therefore, if you have a mapping of, say, Japanese terms to all those event codes, then we can easily translate the term used in one country into Japanese, for example, simply by going through the code mapping process. Sorry, that's just an addition to what I missed earlier.
Okay, good. Thank you, Norm. Any other questions before we move on? No? Okay. Up next, Scott, if you're there, you're going to be able to take us through a brief walkthrough of the spreadsheet. So hopefully you'll be able to share your screen as well so we can see what we're looking at there.
Do you want me to bring my screen back up and put the list up?
Scott, would that work if Norm did the list, or would you like to share?
I have the list up now. And this is the list as viewed in the document. Excuse me. Norm went over much of this, but a couple other points. The event code in the left-hand column, you'll notice that these are sequential numbers. They're sequential numbers just because we have this initial list and we just put numbers to it. When new terms are added, they will be numbered in sequence, but it will not change any event term codes in the future. So if we found something that would fit between administrative activity and air hazard, it would be OET-200 something, because there are currently a bit more than 200 codes in the list. So that's to provide for some backward compatibility. You don't have to, if you use OET-007 now, that means event crash, and it will mean that same term even if we go through 5 or 10 revisions or updates of the list. Again, as Norm mentioned, the event term column is the actual text that would be sent, and you'd be able to see that in the message. I'm going to jump over to the right-hand column, the category codes. These are a specific set of codes that are for the event category code element in the message. So there's other safety, security, meteorological, transport, even environmental health. You'll notice that any one event term may have more than one CAP category code. It's just a matter of it falls within both domains. Whether you say that the CAP category is one or the other is your implementation or your implementation. But if you know you have a security situation, you could look at this in terms of just security category codes, and you would see all those. I'll demonstrate some of that in a moment. The grouping somewhat relates to the idea of spectrums, but we ended up calling the members of a group of siblings. So, for example, criminal activity, active shooter situation is criminal activity, and there are other criminal activity items in there. So just as you can look for safety or security for the the active shooter situation, you could actually just look for criminal activity. And you would see a number of somewhat related or somewhat related terms. To demonstrate that a little better, I'm going to change to this is the same list, but in Google Sheets. We did our development work in Google Sheets so that we could work on it concurrently. It's the same information. There are actually copies of this available on if you open the Excel version that's on the OASIS documents, you would be able to see this, and these links take you to the Google Sheet version and the Excel version if you want to play with them. But you work primarily from that list in the document. That's the official list. But this allows me to show you things such as if we wanted to see, as I said, one of them was, let's say, just the aviation hazard. So by looking up the grouping aviation hazard, we have these, what we termed siblings of air hazard, air crash, aircraft incident. So it all has to do with aviation, whether it's airspace, general aviation, or specifically aircraft. It just provides a way of finding things. So you could do it two ways. One, you could say, oh, I know I have some kind of aviation thing, and look it up in grouping, or you could find some term that isn't quite what you want. Like, well, you found airport closure, but that's not really what you wanted to say. You wanted to say something about a general aviation hazard. If you looked up airport closure and then found aviation hazard and then brought up this list of just aviation hazards, you could see that, oh, there's these other ones, and really it's an overall aviation hazard. It wasn't just an airport closure. There's other things associated with it. So there's it was an explosion, and there's things floating in the air, so it's also an air hazard. You could put the multiple terms, or you could decide on one of these terms being the most appropriate. Similarly, you could do a similar thing with the category codes. And I want to do one that's not going to be too many. Let's do health for just a moment and see. Well, there are quite a few in the health code. But of all these health things, there are different, in addition to different terms, there are different groupings. So health includes both, broadly speaking, health issues and health hazards, biological hazards, public health. So again, there's the two columns for grouping and category codes allow you to narrow a scope, so you can find something that's more closely related to what you're looking for. So since we have a limited list here, and I've decided that what we want is really this air health hazard, okay, what we termed as health hazards were contagious disease and contaminated water. You could reasonably argue that some of these associations are somewhat arbitrary. The point is not to make them perfect, it's to provide guidance to the implementers and the systems of how these things work. Again, Elisa mentioned that we're keeping track of requested changes and additions on our wiki page. At this point, I believe you can send those suggestions to anybody in the group, or at least Jacob, can they send it to the list, or I'm not quite sure if there's another. I don't
Actually,
recall.
there's several ways to do it. Thank you, Scott. Most of you are members, Andreas as well, and you can just post those to the CAP list. Frank, I know you'll have some comments, and you've used the comment facility before, but you can also just send those directly to Jacob. So I think that should cover it. And we are recording this, so I should say that what we did discuss last time was just to send those directly to Jacob.
Yes, I can receive those, and then I'll enter them into the JIRA system, and I'm also taking notes as well during these meetings. So we should have a good capture of any issues that are raised now, and then in the future, certainly by email is the best method.
Another aspect of the list, currently you see it's all in English. There was a good deal of work, and I think it came from Frank Bell, that included a number of other languages. The problem we had with that, it wasn't the material that was sent in, since none of us were native speakers of any of the other languages, well, except for French. There was an issue about whether it actually meant the same thing. Just transliteration doesn't necessarily work. And there's also an issue that a concept in another language just may not translate into English. So that was a level of detail that we felt was best left until we could get a better representation of the knowledge for those languages. It is a thing on a future. It's a future task, but it's going to take some additional participation. So if you are interested, or you know people that might be helpful, that would help for that extension to become reality. Oh, and there was a mention also of, you don't have to limit yourself to this list. So if you're putting in an event term just as text, you just don't put in an event code. The limitation is that another system couldn't trigger off of that event code to do any specific work. We also provided this other event. If nothing else works, you can just say it's something else. Whether that's useful or not depends on your situation, but it does exist just to cover all bases. Any questions or comments on the list itself? I should mention that a lot of work went into this. We had, this list is a little over 200. I think we had on the order of 300 or more. And we went through it for at least 4 different ways and consolidated and broke concepts out. And there's a lot of brain power in this thing. I was mainly just an organizer and kept things sorted on this list, but it represents a good effort by many people.
Because the event terms have changed since the original translation effort was done, basically that would need a whole lot of revision to start over anyway.
Well, potentially, but that information still exists. So if the event term hasn't changed significantly, there's a way we could match through to bring that back. So that information wasn't lost. It was, yeah, Frank, that information wasn't lost. It's just stored away here. It's not in the document, but it is in this list or these spreadsheets, in particular, the Frank Bell translation work. So we could still find, well, I don't want to do that one, temperature hazard. And as we go across here, come on, work. oh, there it is. You have so you have a lot of languages here, and I'm sure you've put in a lot of work. So I really do appreciate that. You even put in some things where you weren't quite sure if it was the correct translation, but it does provide a first step at least, if not a full representation.
I would call it more like a first iteration.
Okay. But again, it was really interesting. When I first did this, I was like, oh yeah, so I wonder if I really have, I'd spend more time in healthcare, and some of these languages actually would be pertinent. And I was wondering if I needed to, it got me thinking about the work that I normally do and how this might inform that as well.
Also, this is Norm here, just going to add to that comment. When we look at terms, when we did this a couple of years ago, and then you talk about it, you learn about it, you become more familiar with it, and then you go back and look at some of your earlier decisions and you change your mind and you go through it more and you learn more again and you go back and review and you change your mind. Each time you go back, there's so much to go back and review because there's a large list of terms. So we know that there's a lot of terms still out there that haven't been added. What we're trying to establish here is a version 1.0 with a good sampling of terms to go forward to add more terms. I wouldn't be surprised if this term list is twice as big in a couple of years, or even larger than that. But each time we evolved our understanding of an event term and its use and its meaning and all the repercussions of choosing a term, it meant we had to go back and review the entire lists of submissions again. So we slowly stopped doing the complete review of everything that got submitted because it just was too much time. So hopefully what we're trying to do is establish a foundation. Once we get the foundation solid, then maybe we can do a more of a final pass through of all the earlier submissions.
Yes, good points, Norm. Are there any other questions about the actual list of terms or any particular terms in specific ones that were any questions that might need to be raised? No? Okay. Well, that does kind of wrap up the meeting at this point in terms of our agenda. We really tried to cover what we've done with the committee note and then, of course, the details with regards to the terms. Our next steps as a group is obviously to take back some of this feedback, work on a next iteration of the committee note, incorporating some of this feedback. And then, we have talked about some potential go-forward aspects to this list in terms of the management of the spectrums, maybe offering a service to be able to query and look up the codes. And then, as Norm mentioned, potentially a practices guide with regards to how to use the event terms and the list and the codes and everything that goes with the work that's been done. So is there any further items that anyone wanted to discuss or bring up before we wrap up this input meeting?
Yeah, Jake, this is Rex, and I came in late, so I wasn't present for the comments on the committee note. So I'll be reading your minutes to get caught up.
And actually, we're recording, Rex, so you'll have a recording I'll post shortly, and you can listen to it at your leisure.
Great. Thank you.
Sounds good. So yeah, maybe I'll just ask for our attendees today if there's any, our guests, if there's any further questions or issues that you'd like to bring up with regards to this work before we close.
Just to let Andreas know that last week we got some input back from a few others that haven't come up in conversation today. So just so be aware that there's other items that were raised last week.
Okay, thanks for the information. Yeah.
So Jacob will put out a meeting summary of, or the notes, of course, the recording helps with that, but Jacob will be able to consolidate all the comments that come in and get them out to everyone that attended. And we certainly appreciate everyone's time in attending, but I can't say thank you enough for Norm and Scott and all of the discussions we've had for now literally years as we've gotten through to this point. And in addition to them, Rex as well for getting the document through the edit process. And we have a little cleanup to do, but we do look forward to everyone's comments and our final review and publishing this so that we can get on to our next bit of work, which will be to address a practices guide for mobile alerts, which is going to be an interesting bit of work for us. So that will also take some time, but it'll be interesting, and I'm sure this committee will do a great job with it. So I don't have any final comments.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah. Is anyone else with any other final comments or questions to raise? No? All right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Definitely appreciate the time, especially for those of you